So this week, the Steam Link and Steam controllers came out. I received mine yesterday. I was at work. I got the text, or not the text, but the email saying that my stuff was delivered, and I was all excited. And as soon as I got home, I ripped open the packages and took out the controller. And I want to talk mostly about the controller today because I feel like that's the most important part of this whole new ecosystem that they're trying to put together. So let's talk about just the controller at first. The feel of the controller. When I first got it out of the package and I held it in my hand, I wasn't turned on or anything like that. I was waiting for my son to still get off the bus, so I didn't want to start anything. I was just kind of holding it in my hand and mulling it over. And man, at first this thing feels alien in your hand. Its shape is very different than the 360 controller, which is what I'm going to be doing most of my comparisons to. That's the controller that I've used probably more than any other controller. I've had a 360 controller hooked up to my computer for ages, even before you could go out and buy 360 controllers for Windows. I actually went out and bought one, and I cut the cord off and then spliced it with the USB from an old mouse so that I could use it on a computer. So I like 360 controllers I've been using for a long, long time. So that's what I'm going to do most of my comparisons with. So for about the first 10 minutes of just kind of holding the controller and feeling the buttons and stuff, I really felt like I made a huge mistake. I bought two of these and a Steam Link. But once you start playing something, your brain starts to adapt to its new environment, and the controller is really comfortable. The 360 controller, I tend to hold on to with some kind of death grip as if someone's trying to take it away from me. The shape of the 360 controller just kind of makes me do it. I'm not saying it's bad, because, again, that was my go-to controller for years. It's just the way it tends to work for me. I just really grip that thing. The Steam controller, on the other hand, forces me to relax a bit in order to get my thumbs in the right position. So once you stop trying to bend the world to your will, the controller feels very, very comfortable. And like I said, it took me about 10 minutes to get to that point, which, after, I don't know, maybe 10 or more years with the Xbox 360 controller, 10 years? I'm not sure. But after that long with the Xbox 360 controller, 10 minutes? Not bad for getting comfortable with the controller. Whoops, let me turn off my notifications on my phone. Sorry about that. The Steam controller build quality is really, really great. It's got like this textured look to it. The seams are really, really close. It's put together really well, and the textured look, some parts of it are shiny and other parts of it are flat. And when you look at pictures of it, it looks like it's a different shape than it does when you look at it in person. And I think that's because of some parts of it are shiny and some are flat. The lighting, it's hard to light. Well, I mean, I'm not a photographer or anything, but I think it probably causes problems where you can't tell what shape it is when you're looking at it in a picture. So I want you to think of an Xbox 360 controller as like it's got like an underside to it, whereas this one almost has an overside to it, where the hand grips are pushing up into your hands a little bit. This doesn't come across in the photographs that I've seen very well. But it's like I said, is very, very comfortable. Let's move on to the haptic feedback. This is probably the hardest part to explain. It's probably also the most important. The controller is always giving you some kind of feedback. It's telling you something about it through taps and clicks and vibrations, and they all feel different. Somehow, they've made the pads feel like that there's something under the pad pushing back at you when you use them. It's incredibly difficult to explain, and that's why I think most people don't really talk about the haptic feedback all that much, because it's almost impossible to put into words. It's really weird. It really has to be experienced in order to understand what it's like, and this is a bad thing for Valve, because when you first use it, you're like, oh, that's what's going on. But up until that point, you are very, very skeptical. Or at least I think most people are very, very skeptical of it. Now, this is another point where Valve may have actually made a really good move, which I think I probably complained about, that they got a deal with GameStop to get into their stores. People need to get their hands on the controller in order to understand the haptics. Now, that being said, anytime I've ever used a controller in a store, it's locked down so you can't really feel the way it's supposed to feel. It always feels heavier, or you can't move it very much, or it's on some kind of rigid wire that keeps you from moving it, and you never really get a good feel for a controller until you get it home without the tethers that are put there to prevent jackasses from stealing it. So the haptic the haptic feedback is something that needs to be felt in order to understand how it works. Let's talk about all of the different parts. Now, when you look at the Steam controller, the first thing that jumps out at people are the pads. It's got these two huge thumb pads, like track pads, that are where, if we're looking at a 360 controller, one of them is where the 360 left stick is, and the other is where the 360 face buttons are. Let's talk about the left pad first. The left pad has a small indentation in the shape of a cross so that your thumb knows where that you are pressing. And you can set up the left pad in two ways. You can set it up so that there's a click. I tried a D-style pad game. I tried Cave Story Plus and Super Mario Bros. 2 using the D-pad as input. I don't really like using it for directional control. When I was using it, I always kind of felt like my thumb was gravitating back over to that stick instead, because it felt like it was a better input method. You can set it up to click, so basically I have to push down on the different parts of the pad in order to move left or right or up or down. Or you can set it up with a tap. Now, the tap works with, I don't know if tap is really the right word. I think a better word might be, I guess I can't think of another word. You just kind of place your thumb there and leave it there, and that's like you're pushing down. So you're not putting any pressure down. It's kind of like using a trackpad on a laptop, I guess. So I tried it without the clicking. Just having my thumb in the right spot, not putting any pressure on the pad, and this didn't really feel right either. It was too easy for me to go from a horizontal input to a vertical input by accident. Now, this could be my fault. This could be all on me, because the one thing about this controller that is incredibly important is the software that comes with it. And the software is fantastic. You can adjust everything. And just like everything else on the controller, you can adjust everything about the D-pad. You can set a bigger dead zone so that your thumb has to do more traveling, cutting back on the amount of spurious inputs. You can set it up so that you have a different dead zone horizontally than you do vertically. I didn't mess around with this too much, and the reason for that is because I have Super Nintendo controllers for any type of game that is D-pad, that is D-pad focused. I mean, I've never found a D-pad that I've liked more than the Super Nintendo controller, but that's just me. Another reason why I didn't mess with it too much is because the thumbstick almost always works as well as a D-pad for this style of game. And I just found myself not using the left pad very much. Now, that being said, what would I use the left pad for? Well, mostly I'm thinking I might use the clicking as extra buttons, kind of like weapon selection in a first-person shooter where you push up to switch to your shotgun or whatever. That kind of thing. The great thing about this D-pad is it's so customizable. You can set those up as taps or clicks. You can also set it up so that when you click it, it inputs the corresponding direction along with the click, giving you a lot more combinations in a very, very small area. Not to mention mode shifting. So with mode shifting, as if there were not already enough inputs and options under the left thumb pad, you can also set it so that if you hit another button, it shifts the thumb pad into a different mode, and you can set all new buttons to that spot. So then now you've got all new inputs. And this sounds like a really good idea, and I can see how maybe it would be great. But I think it would probably overcomplicate gameplay. And any game where you really needed that many inputs, I think you probably would be better off with a mouse and keyboard anyway. The right thumb pad is perfectly smooth, unlike the left thumb pad. So it doesn't have that indent. At first I thought, oh no, I'm not going to be able to tell where my thumb is on the pad without looking at it. But when you're using it, you just seem to know. I'm not sure how, but they have put the trackpad at like the perfect angle. And for some reason, my brain just says, okay, I know exactly where I am, and it works very, very well. The right pad can be clicked in for button use, like the other one. My first instinct here was going to be, let's use this as a mouse click, so I can use the right thumb pad as a mouse and then push it in to click my mouse. But you end up moving your thumb just a little bit when you push the button, so you end up moving the mouse and clicking at the same time, and you're not clicking in the spot that you had anticipated, which when you're trying to use a mouse is really important. You can also, and this is a feature I did not know about before I bought it, it's really cool, you can use it as a double tap. Now, when you're double tapping, again, think of it like a trackpad. You're doing two taps, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing a double click on a mouse. You can have a double tap mean anything. So maybe this could be your jump button or something else. It feels really great, perfectly natural, and it works fantastic. Pardon me. The grip levers are really, really cool. Now, going forward, I think that these are going to be on just about every controller there is. It adds more buttons in a place where there's just wasted button real estate on a controller. Your thumbs can stay where they need to be, and you don't have to move them to the face buttons to do stuff. They're really natural feeling, and they're fantastic. Looking at a picture of the controller, when I first saw it, I was worried that these wouldn't be able to be depressed at the same time. Almost as if it was like a lever on a fulcrum, where if I pushed down one side, the other side would pop up. But thankfully, that's not the case. It just looks like that. The stick, for a company who was going to ship a controller that had no stick at all, Valve really brought home the bacon on this thumbstick, and I can't believe it, but this is the part that I think that I wrote the most about. The part that I was most excited about were the trackpads, but the thumbstick is fantastic. This thing is awesome, and it feels like the perfect design for a thumbstick. I'm going to compare it with what I'm the most familiar with, again, the 360. It's a little bit smaller than the 360. The 360 sticks, I mean. Your thumb doesn't fall into the middle of the stick either. I always liked the concave stick of the 360. That little indent made it really easy to use, and it made you really know where your thumb was on the stick. It also helped you grip the stick very well. The Steam controller stick is convex, so it's bumping up instead of down. When I first saw this, I was very concerned because I've used controllers with a convex shape before, and my thumb would tend to slip off of them, or they would slightly slide back to the center to their dead zone unless I pushed down on them with like the weight of a million suns. So I was having trouble keeping the sticks where they are. The top of the stick has this really perfect rubbery grip to it, and around the center of the convex shape is a raised circle, surrounded by whatever is the opposite of dimples. I don't know what the opposite of dimples would be called, but like little bumps all around the outside. It feels really great on the thumb, and it lets your thumb know where on the stick you are pushing, and it does not slip at all. And even though it doesn't stick, it doesn't slip, doesn't mean that the stick isn't stiff. It feels a lot stiffer than the 360 controller. One of the things I loved about the 360 controller over the PlayStation controllers was that the stiffness. The PS3 controller always felt really loose and muddy, and I always had trouble controlling games with it. This takes it to a whole new level. This stick is stiff. Insert your sophomoric chuckles here. And there's this degree of resistance to the stick that just feels great. And for me, it's hands down the best thumbstick on the market. Again, I have not played with a PS4 or an Xbox One outside of a store setting. You walk by in Best Buy and you check it out. And like I said at the beginning, those controllers, you never really get a feel of how they are. The stick on this is the best, in my experience. Maybe the other ones are good, but again, I don't know because I haven't used them very much. Let's talk about the triggers. The triggers have a 2-stage pull, so when I read about this, the first thing I thought of was the GameCube triggers. But it feels very different from the GameCube trigger. The GameCube trigger felt very loose, and as I was pushing it in, it felt like I could go anywhere I wanted and then click it, and that's when it actually felt the resistance. This trigger has resistance the whole time, and not only does it have resistance, but it's got that haptic feedback. You're constantly getting information back from the controller through those clicks and ticks or whatever it is. And it really lets you know how far you have pulled until the click, and it feels really great. And then when you pull the trigger all the way in, and you get that final click, it keeps clicking at you. It's going tap, 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 reminding you, hey, you're pulling the trigger in all the way right now. You can turn that on or turn that off if you don't like it. I really liked it because I didn't realize that I was doing it. So I was trying out a game. I forget what game it was, and I pulled the trigger all the way into... it was Guild Wars 2. I pulled the trigger all the way in to try and do a jump. And then I realized that I was still holding the jump button down, even though I didn't need to, just because it's the trigger, and that's I guess the kind of thing that I do with a trigger. Maybe I'm weird. Well, I know that I'm weird. Maybe that's not normal. So you can set it up so that it'll do two things, and that's cool. So now you've got extra inputs where you didn't before. You pull a little bit, you do one thing. Pull it all the way, you do both things. Notice what I said there. You do both things. This is both good and bad. Yes, you have more inputs, but it also means that these inputs need to be related to each other. Otherwise, you're going to do something that you don't want to do. So let me give you an example. Again, the first game that I tried this with was Guild Wars 2. I figured this is the hardest possible thing that you could probably throw at this is an MMO. Throw an MMO at this that is not designed for a controller, and we'll see where it falls down. So I threw an MMO at it, and I'll let you know at the end what I thought about that. So I tried putting dodge and jump on one trigger of the controller. So I pull in a little bit and I jump. I pull in all the way and I dodge. And this is for Guild Wars 2. It would not work for me because every time I tried to jump, I would also dodge. So you can't skip over one to do the other. So it ends up doing both. And this would be very useful in certain situations, like in a shooter with iron sights. And that's the example that Valve gave, by the way. You pull in the trigger just a little bit, You bring up your iron sights, and then you fully depress it, and it shoots. That would be really great, because any time you're going to shoot, you're going to want to bring up the iron sights anyway. Being able to bring up the iron sights ahead of time without shooting would have required an extra button press on another controller. This one, you just pull in a little, and it brings it up. So that's really cool. That's where it works well, and I don't think that it would work well in other situations where you're trying to get it to do two things that are not related. So I'm not sure how much I'll use this feature, but I'll bet you something else will pop up and I'll be using it without really even noticing it right away. So that's the triggers. Then there's the shoulder buttons. Now, I might be weird, but whenever I use a controller, I've never been one to have my index fingers on the shoulder buttons and my middle fingers on the triggers. I've always used my index finger on both sets of shoulder things. So if I need to use a trigger, I use my index finger. And if I need to use a shoulder button, I bring my index finger up to the shoulder button. On the Steam controller, this felt completely natural for me. However, I was curious as to how this would feel for people who play games the way that they're designed to do, where you've got your index fingers up on the shoulder buttons and then your middle fingers down on the triggers, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. I don't think that if that's the way that you play games, where you've got your index on the buttons and then middle on the trigger, if that's for you, then this controller it's uncomfortable to hold it that way. I felt like it was going to fall out of my hands, and I didn't want to grip it because, of course, there's grip buttons on the back. So let's move on from the shoulder buttons. There's not much to say there, except for in the software. One thing that I noticed about it in the software was that the shoulder buttons, which if you look at them, they are above the trigger, are below the trigger in the software, just the way that you're looking at it. And that made me get a little confused. So that, just trying to help you out if you're using it for the first time and you're making the same mistake I did. Now let's talk a little bit about the face buttons. They're smaller than the 360 buttons, and they bump up. They're rounder, I think. I feel like there's more room between the buttons as well, and I thought this would be a problem for me, but after about that 10 minutes, it felt totally natural. I'm not sure if I like it more or I like it less. It's just different, and it works very well. Not much else to say about the face buttons. You can, again, bind them to anything because the software is fantastic. So they can be anything. You can also use that mode shifting that I talked about before so that you can bind extra stuff to those buttons. So maybe if I mode shift with the left grip, now I've got 8 things set up on my face buttons. And if I mode shift with the right grip, now I've got 12 things set up on my face buttons. Again, it gets really complicated. I don't think that's the best way to play a game, but you can if you want. Now, for the surprise. There was a surprise that I did not know about. Now, first off, when you pre-order, I don't know if you still can, but when you get a Steam controller, they give you a copy of Portal 2 and a copy of Rocket League. They give you a copy of Rocket League and Portal 2. And that's the first shooter that I was going to try out was Portal 2. So I loaded it up. And I was just, messing around. I figured, hey, if anybody's going to get this right, it's going to be Valve. And when I loaded up Portal 2, the game asked me if I wanted to use the gyroscope. I didn't even know that the controller had a gyroscope in it. Or maybe I did know, and I just forgot. I'm not sure which is true. But either way, it was a surprise to me. Now, the gyroscope allows you to use the controller now, I've never used a 6-axis, really. PS3 was not my thing. I had a 360. I didn't like PlayStation controllers because the sticks felt muddy for me. So I know that the 6-axis had this ability, but I never really used it, so I don't know. But the first time that I really experienced this, having a gyroscope in a controller like this, was Splatoon for the Wii U. When Splatoon first came out, I was completely against this method of control. And the method of control is that you can use the controller and kind of tilt it around to help you aim a little bit. Now, when I first heard it, I thought, oh, that sounds terrible. It's not going to be very accurate at all. I've completely come around to it, and I think it's a fantastic control method, and it's very natural feeling, which was surprising. I'm happy to see that I'll be able to use it in more games. So the gyroscope is a welcome addition, and it was very big, not big surprise, but a good surprise that I'm happy that they have. Finally, I just want to say again, this thing is really well designed. The back cover, which also incorporates the grip levers, has a little tiny switch on the bottom, which pops off, and the batteries, this is really well designed, go into the palm rest of the controller. This makes the controller feel really well balanced. It's heavy on the sides and not in the middle. And the shape is really well. It fits in the hand really, really great. And overall, I got to say that this controller, it has a lot of promise. Now, if we can just get game developers to make sure that when they're designing their game, they put in options to use some of this stuff so that you don't have to go through it. Now, going through and setting up stuff, it's a little complicated. There's some things in there that I don't know what they do. I thought that I wrote one of them down, but I guess I didn't. I can't remember what it was. Oh, there was a button. There was a thing called multi-button option for one of the shoulder buttons, and I couldn't figure out what it did. I Googled it. I can't find it anywhere. I'm sure somebody will come up with it. This thing came with no manual. The manual was 3 pictures on how to turn it on, which, by the way, was really easy. You plug in the USB stick, you turn on Steam, and then you push the button, and you're all set. It works really well. But talking about the software, one of the great things about the software, and then this is the last point I'm going to make, is that other people can upload their profiles for you to use. Now, the bad side is that this is only available for games that you've bought on Steam. So if you add a game to Steam that's not available on Steam, you don't have access to the community loadouts, I guess would be called, or the community bindings. So every game, every Steam game anyway, when you go in to manage this game and then customize the controller, there's going to be a tab there that says community. And you can go through and look at setups that other people have designed for you, and it really will help out. I think Logitech has a similar system for the G13. I've never really used it, but you can go out and find bindings that work really well for a specific game that you're going to be playing. This is cool. If for no other reason, then sometimes there will be options that you didn't think of. Oh man, I almost forgot one more thing. The outside of the pads can also be used for like a scroll wheel. So if you want to run your thumb around the outside of a pad in a clockwise direction, that could have it be scrolling up. And then going in a counterclockwise direction is scrolling out or down. And you can decide which way that's going to be. So overall, my overall thoughts, too long didn't listen or too long didn't read. Overall thoughts on the Steam controller. It's really great. High build quality. Fantastic thumbstick. Very comfortable. And I would definitely buy more if I needed more. So right now I've got 2. And the very last thing that I want to say is the Steam Link. It worked without any setup. I just plugged it in, hooked it up to my TV. I turned it on. It said, go to your computer and put in this code. I put in the code, and I was playing a game on my TV from across the house. The game was on my computer in the office, which is all the way on the other side of the house. So anyway, fantastic. Let me know what you guys think of this Steam controller, and also let me know if there's any games that you want me to test out with the Steam controller, and give you my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.